Hey, everybody, this is John Fenn, and this is another chapter of the discipleship process, talking about walking with the Lord and how to grow and receive revelation and growth in Him. My name is John Fenn. It's Church Without Walls International, CWOWI.org, talking about how we are a process, not a project to God. And there's a larger story to this, and I'll tell perhaps in a minute here. But I want to share with you something that happened in the Apostle Peter's life, and you can relate it, I'm sure, to your life and my life. I know I can relate. In John chapter 21, Jesus tells Peter how he will die. He says, "When you are old, someone will come forth and stretch forth your hands and take you to where you don't really want to go." Now, Jesus said that in John chapter 21, and that was part of verses 20-21. Where he was talking about the kind of death that Peter would die when he was old. Why did Jesus make that statement? Why did Jesus say, hey, but when you are old, somebody's going to come and stretch out your hands and take you where you don't want to go? Jesus said that in response to the previous conversation. You know, Peter was always the guy to jump in with both feet. You know, he wanted to walk on the water. He was the one to exclaim, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He blurted out his denial of even knowing the Lord. He was like, "Lord, if you wash my feet, then wash my whole body too." And Jesus said, "No, just your feet. That's all that's required." You know, Peter was the kind of guy who opened his mouth and thought about it later. You know, he just jumped in there. So Jesus says this in John chapter 21, verses 20 and 21, signifying the death that Peter would die. "Stretch forth your hands when you are older and take you where you don't want to go." Why did he do that? It's because in verses 15 through 19, they'd had this previous conversation. Jesus had prepared a meal on the beach after the guys had gone fishing. Now, Peter, James, and John were partners in a fishing business. Luke chapter 5 and verse 10 tells us that Peter, James, and John were partners in a fishing business, having at least two boats. And remember, that's how Jesus called them from the fishing business to follow him. And they, in Luke chapter 5, they left everything to follow Jesus. But after the resurrection, with no further instructions, they had a family to support and everything else. Peter said, "I'm going fishing." And James and John went with him, and Philip and a couple of the others, and they fished all night and caught nothing. In the morning, they saw Jesus having a coals made, a fire made with some broiled fish and things like that, and they recognized it was the Lord. And so Jesus is sitting there after they had eaten, and Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" Now, the argument could be made that say, okay, he's comparing, do you love me more than the Apostle John? Do you love me more than Philip does? But, you know, that's out of character. I don't believe that because it's out of character for Jesus. We don't see in the Gospels Jesus at any time pulling the disciples to say, "Hey, Thomas, do you love me more than Peter does?" You know, he never says to anybody, you know, privately, "Hey, Matthew, do you love me more than the Apostle John does?" You know, that would be out of character for Jesus to say, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" Talking about his brothers in the Lord right there. What it does fit in the context is Jesus saying, "Do you love me more than these?" Meaning your fishing business, the way you're earning a living, these fish that you've gone back to after my resurrection. And Jesus used, the first two times Jesus asked this question, "Peter, do you love me?" And that word is agape. That is, or the root of it, agape or agapeo, which means unconditional love. The Amplified Version puts it this way. When they'd finished the breakfast, Jesus said to Peter, "Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" With total commitment and devotion. That's the word agape. The word agape is used in John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. It's used in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43, 44, 46, where the Lord said, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself, and you shall love your enemies." He's talking about agape love, the kind of love that lays down its life for another. That's agape. And so Jesus asked him, "Peter, do you agape me?" But Peter did not respond in that way. You see, there's another form of the word love in the Greek, and that's the word phileo, Philo, is one of the roots, or philo, Philo is how we would spell it. And that is the love of a best friend. So there's a couple different kinds, and there's also, of course, Philadelphia, which is brotherly love. And that's why in the U.S., the city of Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love, because Philadelphia means brotherly love. But the two other words, agape and phileo, are two other higher forms of love, if you will. That phileo is the love of two best friends, and agape is the love that God so loved the world that he gave his son. It's the love that says, "I will lay down my life for you." So Jesus asked Peter twice, "Do you agape me?" And Peter responded each of those 2 times, Lord, I phileo you. I love you with the love of a best friend. So the Lord asked, do you love me like lay down your life for me, Peter? And Peter says, Lord, I love you like a best friend. And the second time Jesus says, Peter, do you love me with full devotion like you'd lay down your life for me? And Peter says, no, Lord, I love you. You know, Peter in his honesty, he's just so blunt and he's so honest and he's so transparent. You got to admire the guy. And he says, Lord, I phileo you. I love you like a best friend. And finally, the third time, Jesus comes down to Peter's level. That third time, Jesus says, Peter, do you phileo me? Do you love me like a best friend? And Peter's now upset because they keep going on this path. And he says, Lord, I've told you before. I've told you 2 times before. I love you like a best friend. And that is why Jesus made the statement in acknowledging that now he loves him like a best friend. But the very next words out of Jesus' mouth are, but when you are old, someone's going to stretch forth your hands and take you to where you don't want to go. In other words, Jesus was looking at the larger process in the life of Peter. He was looking at the process of the person named Peter. He wasn't looking at right there where he was. He was looking at the process that right now he did not love the Lord to the point of willing to lay down his life for him, but he loved him like a best friend. So Jesus came down to his level to allow him to grow into that kind of unconditional love. But Jesus did it with a caveat. He said, but when you are older, my friend, when you are older, you're going to stretch forth your hands. You're going to indicate you agape me. You love me to the point of death. It's the same love that is kind of described in Revelation 12:11, where it says they loved not their lives to the death. Folks, when you're first born again, you may quote unquote accept the Lord because you're in a tight situation, or the question of who is Jesus is on your heart, or you're looking for the purpose of life, or whatever the case is. But none of us is at the point where we know what's going to be in the future in terms of our love for him. When Peter, James, and John walked away from the fishing boats that day, they didn't know that they would die deaths. John was the only one. They tried to poison him, and tradition says they tried to French fry him in oil, and the Apostle John would not be poisoned nor French fried. And the Apostle John did live out his death to his full age. But James was killed in James 12, or in Acts chapter 12 with the sword. Peter would die when he's older. He would be crucified. Nobody had any idea what their future held at that point. But it was a process of growing in love with the Lord. And that's the point I want to make here today, is that you're not a project. You're not something where it's a little waffle square here and you finish this little project and this is the life of you. You know, this is a process through for the ages, because Ephesians 2:7 says that he has saved us and called us so that in the ages to come he can continue to show forth the riches of his kindness towards us, which is found in Christ Jesus. In the ages to come. So when Jesus said, Peter, do you agape me, lay down your life for me? And Peter said, no, I love you like a friend. Peter, do you love me like you'd lay down your life for me? No, I love you second time, Lord, like a friend. That time where Jesus came down and said, Peter, do you love me like a friend? And Peter said, yes, Lord, I've told you before, I love you like a friend. In that transparency, the Lord recognized the end result. He said, yeah, but when you're old, someone's going to stretch forth your hand and you're going to die for me. That love will have developed. And my encouragement to you is this: when we have, we tend to judge others by our motives, but we tend to judge ourselves by our motives and our intent, but we judge others by their actions. And this can give you a little bit of love and a little bit of grace for somebody. And you can answer the question, where do I draw the line with somebody? If they are a process as well, because I'm a process, they're a process. At what point when they intersect my life, do I either write them off or do I stay with them? Because again, in John chapter 5, verses 44, 46, etc., 43, 44, 46, where Jesus says, love your enemies and love those who use you and despitefully, do wrong things to you. That's agape love. Be willing to lay down your life for them. How do you draw the line? For me personally, is there progress in their life? If they are progressing in the Lord, if they are indicating that they are willing participants in the process that is life in Christ, then I can work with that. If they are learning and growing and developing and they are further along today than they were yesterday or last week or last year, I can work with that. The person who has no interest in growth, I'm going to have to put up some barriers there because they just want me to compromise to come to them, their stubbornness. But if you have somebody in your life where there's a process going on, walk in love with them, work with them in the process, because you and I are both processes. We are processes, not projects. Or perhaps in our individual days, there's a project to be done and the Lord's working on us, but overall, we are a process. And some of us might be willing to say right now, if the Lord asked us, do you love me? Do you agape me? We could answer wholeheartedly, yes, I would follow you to the death. Agape you, yes, absolutely. But others are like, Lord, I love you like a best friend, but I'm still getting to know you. And that's okay. It's part of a process. Grow into that. Grow into that love. The main thing is, as Paul said in Philippians 3:10, I want to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. And it's that element of the power and the sufferings, that fellowship there, that commonality with him, where we grow in love, we see his character developing within us, and we become people who maybe at the end of our age would be saying, yes, Lord, I agape you. I would lay down my life for you. But realize, just like Peter, you and I are a process, not just a project. All right, hope that's been a blessing to you. Enjoy the process within you. Enjoy it. It's for the long haul, and the Lord enjoys the process in us. So have the positive attitude and enjoy the process as well. It's not always fun, but it does lead to growth in Christ if you stay with it. All right, talk to you next week. Bye-bye.